So Kamala Harris is clearly going to be the Democratic nominee for president, and seeing that this is JTV, an online global Jewish channel, I wanted to explore a bit what her record tells us about her relationship with Israel and supporting Jewish causes. Her husband is famously Jewish, but what does that mean? Does that have any bearing on her support for Israel or not? Well, let's have a look. This is a video by Lizzie Savetsky that she posted on Twitter. I want to share with you what she says in analyzing her record.
Kamala Harris has now been endorsed by President Biden, the Clintons, and numerous other key players to become the nominee for the Democrats. What would it mean for the Jewish people and Israel if she were to become president? Let's take a focused look at her approach to the attack on Israel and anti-Semitism in America. Less than 1 month after the October 7th massacre, the largest attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust, which subsequently created a tidal wave of Jew hatred throughout the country, Harris responded by releasing a national strategy to counter Islamophobia.
As a result of the Hamas terrorist attack in Israel and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, we have seen an uptick in anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, anti-Semitic, and Islamophobic incidents across America. So today,
I'll just pause there for a second, just so we see that she talks about anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, and anti-Muslim, and then throws in the middle sandwich there, the anti-Semitic one. This is insane. October 7th was the most obscene, genocidal attack against the Jews, not really seen on such a level or scale since the Holocaust. And then we saw an eruption of celebration about the attack around the world. On campuses, we saw a shocking rise of anti-Semitism and heinous slander and lies against the Jewish people. I'm sorry, it is incomparable to other hatreds and prejudice that we've seen. But for some reason, she tries to create this equivalence.
Today, I am proud to announce the Biden-Harris administration will develop our nation's first national strategy to counter Islamophobia.
In this clip, she talks about the October 7th terrorist massacre and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza as if they are two separate, unrelated events. She fails to connect the dots that without the brutal attack on Israeli civilians, there would have been no need for a retaliation by Israel. She also fails to mention that it is Hamas themselves who have created this humanitarian crisis, leaving the viewer to only put the blame on Israel. She then mentions 3 forms of hate against Arabs: anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, and Islamophobia, and only 1 form of hate against Jews, which she mentions 3rd out of 4. The intended target of the October 7th attack was the Jews. This attack was celebrated throughout America as Jews grieved. To many Jews, a strategy to counter Islamophobia, released less than 1 month after this brutal attack, feels like a strategy to counter anti-German sentiments less than 1 month after the liberation of Auschwitz.
Absolutely.
In speech after speech, Harris has demonized the Israeli government while discussing the humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
Israeli government must do more to significantly increase the flow of aid. No excuses. They must open new border crossings. They must not impose any unnecessary restrictions on the delivery of aid.
Before she speaks, let me just say, so a territory, an enemy territory, invades your border, kills 1,500 innocent souls, and then in return, that nation now has to supply aid to that territory. And by the way, let's just be clear, the vast majority of the quote-unquote civilians support Hamas. I say quote-unquote not because there aren't some innocent people there. Of course there are. Children are always innocent. But many of the civilians are not innocent. They are complicit. We saw an Al Jazeera journalist that was decrying Israel, meanwhile hiding and imprisoning, enslaving some of the hostages. And Israel should be supplying them with aid? Why on earth should Israel be expected to have to do that? On so many counts, it is immoral, it is wrong, it's perpetuating the war further and making it go on longer because Hamas gets the aid. Meanwhile, no one turns to the fact that there's another border that Gaza has with Egypt. No one says to Egypt, can you please help? But Israel should be expected to supply an enemy? It's obscene.
Notably absent from this speech and many others is the mention of the hostages, which include 8 Americans. Besides the fact that more aid has been sent into Gaza since before the war even started, Harris never mentions Hamas stealing aid or beating and killing civilians who desperately try to retrieve it. She only blames Israel. Harris also threatened potential consequences from the United States if Israel were to move forward with the Rafah invasion in Gaza.
We have been clear in multiple conversations and in every way that any major military operation in Rafah would be a huge mistake.
Are you ruling out that there would be consequences from the United States?
I am ruling out nothing.
How is Israel supposed to finish the job with Hamas if Hamas is still in power? Do you put out 80% of a fire and just hope the rest dies out on its own? In terms of the growing threat of anti-Semitism in America, in an exclusive interview with The Nation from the National Review, Harris gave credit to anti-Israel protesters, saying they're showing exactly what the human emotion should be. By sympathizing with these protesters who have wreaked havoc for Jews on campus, in our streets, and on public transportation, she is downplaying the very real and violent threat posed by these protesters towards American Jews. She's also ignoring their blatant calls for violence, such as globalize the Intifada, and the fact that many have told us themselves that they either support Hamas or they are Hamas.
We are Hamas!
This is not only a threat to Jews, but a threat to all Americans. Is that what human emotion should be? To conclude, Harris's recent endorsements for the Democratic nomination raise significant questions about her stance towards Israel and anti-Semitism, especially given her response to the October 7th massacre, her failure to properly advocate for the hostages, her balanced condemnation of Hamas, a designated terrorist group, with Israel, a democratic nation who adheres to the highest moral code in warfare, and her conflation of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, which many Jewish Americans view as dismissive of their concerns and safety. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. And by the way, I think part of what's going on here is simply pandering to the hysteria of the crowd, that's so hostile to Israel that she feels is a base that she needs to appeal to. But that's not an excuse. That's not leadership, to simply pandering to whoever has the most hysterical narrative. I think that we see here someone who really lacks moral clarity and an understanding of what's really going on in the situation. I saw a quote, people talk about, well, she's got a Jewish husband, that has to count for something. I'm sorry, but actually it doesn't. You could be Jewish and anti-Semitic. Let's just be clear about that and have anti-Semitic views that run counter to the welfare and well-being of Israel, the state of the Jewish people and the Jews. I saw a quote from Beryl Solomon on Twitter where he said, I'd vote for a Christian Republican before I would vote for a Jewish Democrat, and I'm Jewish. Just trying to make the point that what really should count is values, the values that someone has, over identity politics and all those kind of things. So while she clearly isn't necessarily quite in the squad camp, right, in the Democrat Party, and she's not doesn't have that level of hostility to Israel, it is nevertheless clear that Kamala, I think that's how you pronounce it, is someone that is prepared to pander to the anti-Israel activists and buy into their false narratives that somehow Israel has an equivalence with Hamas, which is so disgraceful, so absurd, when everything Israel's doing in this war is about fighting a just war to get rid of a threat, to retrieve the hostages, and to create wider peace and security for the people of Israel and the wider region. And it is absurd, some of the things that she's been saying, like talking about that Israel has no right to go into Rafah and there'll be consequences if they do. What? Israel can't get rid of Hamas because they choose to hide among civilians? Well, then every terrorist will do that in the future. Time and again, we see the anti-Israel activists telling Israel that whenever she does something basic, essential for her security, that it is somehow heinous. The checkpoints Israel has to do to protect from terrorists, that is humiliating to people. The blockade they had to do in Gaza once Hamas were elected and started sending rockets in, that is outrageous. It's obscene. Israel needs to do it in order to protect herself from these rockets. But no, she can't do that. Apartheid, all these things, they're just used as ways of undermining Israel's basic actions that she needs to do to protect herself. Calling this war a genocide, when all the facts say otherwise, should make it very clear to all of us now, very clear, that all these attacks are just slander in an attempt to undermine the Jews. And it's a slander that is as old as time. For as long as the Jews have been around, there's always been this attempt to first create the false narrative, create the narrative that they're doing something wrong or that they're immoral or that they're a threat, and then you can work on getting rid of them. Now, Kamala hasn't gone to the extent of calling it a genocide. I'm pretty sure she's denied that and said that that's wrong. But there's a slippery slope that she's going down here, and we should be aware of it. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comment section.
Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.